Moving on now to percents. So I want you to think about what is a percent. Percents are always out of 100. So we're always gauging those out of 100. So if you see like 98% on a commercial or in a newspaper or something, that's like saying 98 out of 100 people are going to agree with that or say that. So where do you see percents in real life? Hopefully, one of the first things that comes to your mind is shopping. If you're ever looking at percentages off, like discounts, that's what we're going to talk about today. If you look at sales tax, which we'll talk about later this year, interest rates or percentages that you have to pay back for mortgages and loans, what is that interest rate that you have to pay? So percents are all over. We're going to talk just about percentages off today. We're just going to focus a little bit on that, which is going to lead us into one of the projects that we're going to work on. So percentages off are just one way to look at percents. So I don't want you to think that there's only one way, but we're just going to focus on one way right now. I like to compute these percents mentally as much as possible. So I'm going to show you some tricks. If we know that percents are always out of 100, 10% of $100 is going to be what? Well, if they're always out of 100 and I'm comparing it out of 100, that's going to be $10. Okay? Another way that we can do this, like if we're taking 10% of 62, is that I'm actually going to look at my decimal point. And I'm actually going to end up dividing it by that percentage of 10. So I'm going to actually move my decimal point one spot over to the right, and that's going to tell me what 10% is. So if 10% of $62 is going to be $6.20. If I'm looking at then how much off, if it's 10% off of that, I would have to take that $62 and I would have to subtract $6.20 to get the new amount. So if I wanted to figure out what 10% off was, I'd have to subtract those and I'd end up getting $55.80 as my new amount. So if you're taking the percentage off, you then have to subtract it at the very end. Let's do another one mentally. This time 10% of $15.25. Well, we're going to move that decimal point just one spot over. So 10% is going to be about 1525. Well, you know with money, you can't have thousandths worth of cents there. So that's where it's going to round up. We're going to round that up to be 153. Okay? Then I could take 1525 and subtract 153 from it to get my new total here, which would be $13.72 is going to be the new price. So if you're shopping in a store, it's easy for you to figure out what 10% is of that number, because you can just move that decimal point over from the original price. If, though, you know from shopping, it's not always going to be 10% off. So if we're looking at this next one, 20% off of 40, how can we figure out that? Well, if I know how to find 10% off, I can easily then just double it to figure out what 20% off is. So 10%, I'm going to move that decimal point, 10% is going to be $4. So 20% is going to be what? $8. Subtract that from my original 40 minus 80. The new price of that item is going to be $32. Hopefully you're seeing how this is all coming together today. The next one, 15% off of $60. Well, I know 10% is going to be what? $6. Well, half of 10 is 5%, so half is going to be $3. Add those together, 15% then is going to be $9. So 60 minus 9, the new price is going to be Okay. Now you can also do these with a calculator, and that might be the way that a lot of you choose to do these, and this will all come back into play in a couple of weeks when we talk about our projects. But a way you can do it with your calculator is simply to type in the price and change this percent to a decimal. So we want to change that percent to be 0.25. And I'm going to then multiply it by this price of $35.50. When I type that in my calculator, I'm going to get what looks like this. Now remember, we can't have those 3 decimal points there, so we're going to round that up to be 888, and I'm going to subtract that from my original, and that's going to tell me the new price of my item, which would be $26.62. 30% off, I'm going to change that to a decimal, so 0.3 or 0.30, however you want to write it. I'm going to multiply that by $16.99. That's going to be 5.097. So we're going to round that to 510. So I'll take $16.99 minus 510. $11.89 is the new price of that item. Okay, so you can solve these any way. If you want to solve them mentally, if you want to solve them by using a calculator, whatever way makes the most sense to you. So I have 3 here that I would like you to try. Go ahead and pause the video. You can solve these any way you would like. Then push play and we'll go back and solve them. All right, let's see how you did. If you change that to a decimal and multiplied it by 1450, you would get rounded 653. Subtract that from your original. You should have got $7.97 for the first one. The next one, 60% off of $49.99. I'm using my calculator for those. That's going to be subtracting $29.99. And if you rounded that to 30, I could understand how you did that. And that's going to be just $20. That's a good deal. Okay. Last one there, 15% off of $62.49. Now I'm going to subtract $9.37. To get $53.12. Hopefully you did well on those. That concludes our percents, and you can go do your practice.